The Saturday crowd at Northern Edge Outfitters moved through the aisles the way weekend crowds always do. Unhurried, half distracted, the kind of slow that belongs to people who have nowhere urgent to be. Raymond Cutter and his daughter Mara were not in a hurry either, but for different reasons. Raymond was never in a hurry. It was one of the few things about himself that had survived everything else intact. Mara was 9. She walked beside him, with both hands wrapped around his left forearm the way she had been doing since she was small enough that the gesture made sense by proportion, and she had never stopped, even though she was almost too tall for it now. She wore her hair in 2 uneven braids that Raymond had done himself. That morning, his third attempt at something his wife, Joanna, had managed in under 2 minutes without a mirror. The braids were imperfect, they were his. The store smelled of waxed canvas and cold rubber and something faintly cedar, the smell of serious preparation for serious places, and Raymond had always liked it. He came here 4 or 5 times a year, never for much, always for something specific. Today it was a compass. A proper baseplate compass, the kind with a rotating bezel and a declination adjustment, the exact kind his late father had carried on every canoe trip in the Temagami from 1974 until the year he died. That compass had passed to Raymond when his father did, and he had carried it for years afterward, until it cracked its housing on a rock shelf, north of Jasper in the spring. He had been meaning to replace it since August. Mara had asked to come. She always asked to come when Raymond had an errand she considered interesting. And she had decided at some point this year that compass shopping qualified. "Do they have the ones that glow?" she asked, examining a card of accessories near the end of the navigation aisle. "Some of them." "Does it matter if it glows?" "At night it does." She considered this with the gravity she applied to most things worth considering. "We should get one that glows then. We're getting the same kind Pop had." Did Pop's glow? Not especially. Mara processed this, seemed to accept it as a reasonable constraint, and moved on to examining something that appeared to be a collapsible water filter. Raymond found what he was looking for on the 3rd shelf. He took it down and turned it over in his hands. The compass was exactly what it needed to be. No more complicated, no simpler. He checked the bezel for stiffness, held it level, watched the needle settle. Good. Some things had not changed. He had been standing there for perhaps 45 seconds when he became aware of the group that had entered the store behind him. There were 4 of them. 2 assistants carrying branded tote bags, a man in pressed chinos, who moved with the particular energy of someone whose job required him to be decisive about other people's preferences, and a woman in a charcoal wool coat who led the group with the unhesitating certainty of someone accustomed to rooms orienting themselves around her arrival. Her name was Diane Holsworth. She was 41. She had built Holsworth Resource Partners from a 2-person office on Stephen Avenue into one of the more aggressive mid-tier resource development firms operating in Western Canada, with active projects in the oil sands north of Fort McMurray and a new survey corridor in the Northwest Territories that her board had approved in February. She had been profiled twice in Alberta Venture magazine and once in a national business publication that had described her management style as precision-oriented. She did not disagree with this characterization. She moved through Northern Edge with the focused efficiency of someone who had a list, had delegated the list, and was now present mainly to ratify selections and ensure the final tally aligned with the image the company retreat was meant to project. Quality, capability, the appearance of serious people doing serious things in serious places. She noticed Raymond Cutter the way she noticed most things in peripheral space, categorically and quickly. Old Carhartt jacket, worn at the elbows. Work boots with mud still in the seams from something that had happened at least a week ago, possibly longer. Jeans that had been washed so many times the dye had gone uneven at the knees. He was holding a compass with the comfortable familiarity of someone who knew what he was looking at. But that was true of a certain kind of tradesperson, the kind who spent time outdoors for work rather than choice, the kind who bought their gear at Canadian Tire or borrowed it from whoever was leading the crew. The girl beside him was clearly his daughter. She had her father's eyes and his stillness, and she was currently attempting to read the back of a water filter package with the focused attention of a child who had been told to stay close and had interpreted this as permission to examine anything within arm's reach. Diane's COO, a man named Brett Halverson, had found the layering system her assistant had shortlisted and was waiting for her confirmation near the technical outerwear wall. She moved in that direction. On her way, she passed the navigation aisle. Raymond was still standing there. He was not in anyone's way. The aisle was wide enough for 4 people to pass comfortably, but the compass he was holding was one of only 2 left on its hook. And the second one, the higher-end model with the additional sighting mirror, was directly adjacent to where he was standing, which meant that Diane had to angle slightly to reach it. She reached. Raymond shifted without being asked to give her more room. She lifted the compass, turned it once in her hand, and put it back. Not the right one. The one Brett had flagged was further along the display. She would have moved on without incident, except that Mara, at precisely that moment, bumped gently against her father's arm and said, not quietly but not loudly either, in the honest volume of a child who has not yet learned to calibrate for audience, "Dad, how do you know which one is the right one when they all look the same?" It was a reasonable question. Raymond was about to answer it. But Diane Holsworth heard it, and she paused, and something in the question, or perhaps in the composed quality of the man's silence as he considered how to answer, or perhaps in the accumulated small signals of the afternoon that had made her impatient before she walked through the door, caused her to say something she did not entirely plan to say. "There's staff for that," she said. She did not say it unkindly, exactly. She said it the way a person says something practical to someone they have already placed in a category that does not require careful handling. Just flag someone down. They're here to help. It was the tone more than the words, the tone that said, "You don't need to stand here working this out on your own." The tone that said, "This is not the kind of store where you should be spending too much time." The tone that said, without saying it, that she had taken one look at the Carhartt jacket and the mud on the boots and reached a conclusion she considered obvious. Raymond looked at her. He did not look at her with anger. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he recognizes but has decided not to engage with. "I know which one I want," he said. His voice was level. Not cold, not warm, simply accurate. Diane's mouth adjusted slightly, a fractional tightening that was not quite a smile. "Of course," she moved on. Mara watched the woman go. Then she looked up at her father. "Did she think you didn't know about compasses?" "She thought she knew something about me that she didn't know." Mara considered this. That's kind of silly. It happens. They moved toward the front of the store. Raymond picked up a small topographic map sleeve near the checkout, examined it briefly, set it back. He was not in any hurry. He had Mara until Sunday evening, and they had plans only to cook dinner together and look at the star charts he had printed for the weekend, a project she had initiated after her class studied constellations in October. The checkout had 2 registers. One was attended by a young woman named Ashley, who was processing a transaction for a couple with a large pile of sleeping bags. The other was staffed by a man Raymond had seen in this store before, mid-40s, with the careful, unhurried manner of someone who had worked the same place long enough to know it the way a person knows their own house. His name tag read Colin Mercer, and he had been the assistant manager of Northern Edge for 7 years. Colin looked up when Raymond reached the counter. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, not the kind of shift you could name from across the room, but a subtle recalibration. the look of a person adjusting from routine into attention. "Mr. Cutter," he said. Raymond set the compass on the counter. "Haven't seen you in a while. Been away. Good trip? Up north, yes." Colin took the compass, scanned it, and set it on his side of the counter. He was about to process the transaction when he paused. Not the way a teller pauses when they've seen something on a screen, but the pause of someone who has just connected two things and is deciding whether the connection matters. "I want to say," Colin began, and then stopped and started again more carefully. "We had a rep in here last month, from Northlight Systems." He said the name with a slight weight, the way you say the name of something large. "They were doing a staff briefing, partner program. They mentioned the Cutter navigation suite. I didn't put it together until just now." He looked at Raymond directly. "That was your work." Raymond picked up the compass from the counter and turned it over once. "Long time ago." "Not that long," Colin said. "They said the core calibration architecture was still the foundation of the current platform." Mara had been leaning against the counter, examining a display of carabiners near the register. She looked up now, not because she had understood what was said, but because the tone of it had changed, and she had her father's sensitivity to the texture of rooms. Diane Holsworth was standing 12 feet away. She had finished with Brett and the outerwear selection, and had come to the front of the store with two of her assistants to review the total before it went to the company card. She was close enough to hear. She had heard Colin say the name Northlight Systems. She had heard him say the Cutter navigation suite. She did not move. Northlight Systems was not a name that required context for Diane Holsworth. It was the firm that had acquired Cutter Aerial Solutions 4 years ago in a deal that the industry press had described at the time as one of the quieter but more significant technology acquisitions in the Canadian resource sector that year. The navigation and drone calibration platform that Northlight had absorbed was now the backbone of the automated aerial survey systems that Holsworth Resource Partners used at every one of its northern sites. Without it, the Fort McMurray drone corridor that her board had approved would have required 3 additional months of manual survey work at a cost her Q3 projections had not accounted for. She knew the name of the company. She had shaken the hand of Northlight's CEO at an industry conference in Edmonton 14 months ago and thanked him for the reliability of the system. She had never once thought to put a face to the name of the engineer who built it. Brett Halverson, who was standing beside her, said something in a low voice. She did not hear it. She was looking at the back of the man in the Carhartt jacket, who was accepting his receipt from Colin Mercer with the same unhurried composure with which he had done everything else in the last 20 minutes. Colin had folded the receipt neatly. He had done it the way you fold something that requires handling. Raymond tucked it into his breast pocket. "Dad," Mara said, holding up a small carabiner, "can I get this?" Raymond looked at it. "What do you need it for?" "I don't know yet, but it seems useful." He considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "Okay." Colin added it to the transaction. Mara held the carabiner with the satisfaction of someone who has made a considered acquisition. Diane Holsworth had not moved. She was not a person who stood still often. Stillness was not her default register. She moved through days the way she moved through boardrooms, forward, purposeful, with the next thing always already in view. But she was still now, and Brett had noticed, and Ashley at the other register had noticed, and Raymond Cutter had not looked at her since he turned to answer Mara's question about the carabiner. What Diane did not know, because she had not been in a position to know it, because the information had never been relevant to anything she needed to decide, was the shape of the life that had produced the man standing at the counter. Raymond Cutter had spent 12 years as a structural and aerospace engineer, first with a federal research institution in Ottawa and then with a private aerospace contractor in Calgary who had hired him in his late 30s to lead a systems integration project that was, at the time, considerably more complex than anything the company had handled before. He had not been famous within the industry. He had been known, among the people who knew about such things, as someone whose work was exceptionally reliable, the quiet kind of reliability that does not generate releases, but accumulates over years into a reputation that functions like a foundation, invisible beneath the structure, essential to everything built on top of it. He had met Joanna during those years. She was a hydrologist who worked for a provincial water authority, and she had a way of explaining complicated things in terms that were exact without being inaccessible. A quality Raymond had recognized immediately because it was one he had spent his own career trying to develop. They had married in a small ceremony outside Canmore in September, 11 years ago, with 30 people in a mountain meadow and a string quartet that Joanna had insisted on despite the logistics. Raymond had not regretted the logistics. Mara arrived 2 years later, in the middle of a project deadline and an early October snowstorm, and Raymond understood in the first hour of holding her that everything he had previously considered important would need to be rearranged. Joanna was diagnosed with an aggressive form of ovarian cancer when Mara was 4. She died 16 months after the diagnosis. Raymond was 44. He took 3 months of leave and did almost nothing, which was the correct thing to do and also the hardest. Then, because Mara needed him to, he came back. He had started Cutter Aerial Solutions in the year after Joanna died, not from ambition exactly, but from the same discipline that had always characterized his work. He had identified a problem in the way Northern Resource Operations conducted their aerial surveys. The calibration systems available were built for warmer, more stable atmospheric conditions and performed poorly above the 58th parallel, especially in the freeze-thaw transition months. He had seen this firsthand on contract work he'd done for 2 survey companies in the territories. He spent 18 months, working largely alone, and during the hours after Mara was in bed, building something better. The solution he developed was not elegant in a showy way. It was elegant the way correct mathematics is elegant, efficient, precise, immune to the kind of complexity that accumulates when a problem hasn't been thought all the way through to its end. He filed the patents in his own name, incorporated a small company, and licensed the technology to 3 northern operators on a fee-per-deployment model that was modest enough to be adopted immediately, but structured to compound over time. By the time Northlight Systems approached him 4 years ago, the Cutter Navigation Suite was running on more than 400 active drone platforms across northern Canada and Alaska. The acquisition had been straightforward. Raymond had negotiated it himself, with 1 lawyer and 2 days of discussion. He held a technical advisory role in the post-acquisition structure and retained a residual equity position that his accountant described, with characteristic understatement, as comfortable. He lived in the same house he had shared with Joanna in the southwest of Calgary. He drove the same truck he had purchased the year Mara was born. He still flew an aging Cessna 172 from Springbank Airport on weekends when the weather permitted, and Mara was beside him in the right seat, and the sky was doing something worth being inside. He had not replaced his father's compass until today, because letting go of things that had belonged to people he loved was something he moved through at his own pace. He was buying Mara a carabiner and replacing a compass on a Saturday morning, because this was what the day had in it, and it was enough. He picked up the bag from the counter. Mara fell into step beside him, the carabiner already transferred to her jacket pocket, her hand finding his the way it always did. They were almost at the door. Mr. Cutter. It came out more direct than Diane had planned. She had built a company on the ability to control the quality of her words before they left her mouth, and this one had not waited for that process. Raymond stopped. He turned partially enough to show that he had heard. Diane was 3 steps behind him. She was no longer holding her tote bag. Brett had it. Her hands were at her sides. Her expression had made a journey in the last 5 minutes that had taken her somewhere she did not visit often. The specific and uncomfortable geography of having been clearly and publicly wrong. "I may have been," she started. "You were," Raymond said. The words were quiet and without heat, the way a statement of fact is quiet and without heat when it does not require decoration. Diane's jaw moved. "I didn't know who you were." Raymond looked at her for a moment. Mara was watching with the clear-eyed composure of a 9-year-old who had absorbed the full weight of the last few minutes without yet having the vocabulary for all of it. "You spoke to someone you didn't know," Raymond said. "The way people speak to someone they've already decided doesn't matter." He said it without any particular emphasis on any particular word, which made it land the way things land when they are simply accurate. "That's the part that's worth thinking about, not who I turned out to be." He let it sit for a moment, the same way she had let her earlier comments sit in the navigation aisle, except that his landed differently, because the room knew it was true and so did she. "Enjoy the retreat," he said, not unkindly, not coldly, in the register of a man who has said what needed to be said and has no interest in the territory beyond it. He turned back to the door. Mara looked up at him as they stepped out into the October morning. The air was clean and cold in the particular way of Calgary in autumn, with the mountains visible to the west, in a way that always seemed slightly implausible, as if the city had arranged them specifically for this hour of light. "Dad," Mara said, "that lady is going to think about that for a long time." Raymond looked down at her. The corner of his mouth moved in the way it moved when something was true, and also, in some quiet way, a little funny. "Probably," he said. "Is that okay?" He considered it. It might be good for her. Mara thought this over. "Okay." She tightened her grip on his hand. "Can we go see the river before we go home?" "Yes." "And can we get tea?" "You don't drink tea." "I might today." "Okay," he said. "We'll see." They walked toward the truck in the easy, unhurried way that belonged to the two of them. Mara's stride a half-beat quicker than his, the way it always was, and Raymond adjusting for it without noticing that he adjusted, the way people adjust for the rhythms of the people they love without ever making a decision to do so. Inside Northern Edge, Diane Holsworth stood for a moment after the door closed behind them. Brett said something. She did not register what it was. Colin Mercer had gone back to his register. Ashley was helping someone find the right gaiters. The ordinary afternoon of a busy outdoor supply store continued around Diane the way ordinary things continue, without pause, without reference to what had just happened, with the indifferent momentum of any Saturday. She was thinking about a specific detail. The Cutter navigation suite had been referenced in the technical briefing her operations team had run in August, before the Fort McMurray corridor went live. She had sat at the head of the table and listened to her chief surveying officer explain that the atmospheric calibration module was what allowed the system to operate reliably in the transition season, when temperatures swung enough between morning and afternoon to compromise standard GPS drift correction. Without that module, her northern survey timeline would have slipped by weeks. She had nodded, approved the operational parameters, and moved to the next item on the agenda. She had not asked who had designed it. She thought about the girl, the uneven braids, the way she had said the word dad with the specific confidence of a child who has no reason to doubt that she is heard every time, without exception. She thought about the carabiner, the small, deliberate way the purchase had been considered, the unhurried patience of a man standing in a navigation aisle on a Saturday morning, with his daughter, holding a compass, waiting for the needle to settle. Brett was speaking again. She turned toward him, and her expression had completed a journey that would take her some time to fully interpret. She found his face and gave him her attention, and they moved on to the car, and the numbers, and the afternoon that continued to arrive, regardless of whether she was ready for it. The email arrived in Raymond's inbox on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the store. It came from a Holsworth Resource Partners address, but the name in the sender field was Diane Holsworth, not her executive assistant, and the subject line read, "Something I should have said." He was at his desk in the spare room he used as a home office, the one that had been Joanna's reading room before he converted it, and that still smelled very faintly of the cedar sachets she had kept on the bookshelf. He read the email once. Then he set down his coffee and read it again. It was direct. It was not performed. It acknowledged specifically what had happened in the store, not the surface of it, the words exchanged, but the thing underneath the words, the assumption she had made and acted on. She named the assumption clearly, which he knew from experience was the harder part. Most apologies are written around the specific thing rather than directly at it. Near the end, she wrote that Holsworth Resource Partners was approaching a significant operational expansion, a new survey corridor in the territories that would require upgraded aerial systems across the full Northern Fleet, and that she would understand entirely if he preferred no further professional contact. She was extending the information because she had spent 11 days thinking about a question she had not expected to be thinking about. What kind of person she wanted in her corner going forward. And why. She did not ask for a response. Raymond thought about the email for 2 days. He thought about it while making Mara's lunch on Thursday. The specific cut of the sandwich triangles she preferred, no crusts, which he had complied with for years without entirely resolving his views on it. He thought about it while reviewing the Northlight quarterly report on Friday evening. He thought about it on Saturday morning while they drove to Springbank Airport. And Mara sat beside him in the right seat, with her chart folded open on her lap, reading the airspace designations aloud, with the careful pronunciation of someone learning a new language. He thought about the woman in the charcoal coat, who had made a quick decision in a navigation aisle and spent 11 days sitting with what it cost her. He knew what it cost a person to write an email like the one she had written. Not the professional cost. The other kind, the one you can't delegate, the one that requires looking at your own reflection long enough to see something you would have preferred to attribute to a bad afternoon. On Sunday evening after Mara was in bed, he wrote back. He declined the operational contact, not with elaboration, not with a list of reasons, simply and cleanly, in the way that leaves both parties with their footing. He kept his existing technical advisory relationship with Northlight, because those decisions were made on merit and on the basis of whether the work was sound, and both of those things remained true. He added one line at the end. For what it's worth, the question is not whether you knew who I was. The question is who you would have been to me if you never found out. He sent it on Sunday night, then went to stand in the doorway of Mara's room the way he did most evenings, listening to the small, even sounds of her breathing. The stuffed fox she had named Walter was tucked under her arm. The star chart she had insisted on keeping on her bedside table was folded incorrectly in the way she always folded things. He stood there for a moment. He did not feel triumphant. He had never wanted anything that required someone else to feel small to achieve it. He had wanted, in that store, the same thing he had always wanted, to stand in a room without anyone requiring him to justify his presence in it. That was not a modest want. Most people, when they thought about it, would find it was the one they had always had. He drove Mara to school on Monday morning in the truck that was 11 years old and ran without complaint. She had her backpack on and her chart tucked inside it for show and tell, and she spent the 7-minute drive explaining the difference between Class C and Class D airspace, which she had mostly gotten right. He listened to every word. Diane Holsworth did not respond to his reply. He had not expected her to. Some letters are sent to say something, not to open a door, and hers had been that kind, and so had his. What changed in the months that followed, Raymond did not know. He was not in the rooms where it changed. He knew only what eventually reached him through the kind of professional network that carries certain kinds of information. That Holsworth Resource Partners had adjusted several of its internal protocols around how site selection proposals were received and who was invited to present them. So that a junior geologist who had flagged a significant methodological concern about the McMurray corridor timeline had, against recent precedent, been heard rather than redirected. That something about the way meetings ran at that company had shifted in a way that the people inside it felt but struggled to name. He learned this in pieces, from people who mentioned it in passing, without connecting those pieces to anything. That had happened on a Saturday morning in October, at an outdoor supply store in northwest Calgary. He did not tell them. Some lessons do not belong in the explanation. They belong in the change itself, in the behavior that is different, and the questions that are now asked before the conclusions are reached, and the words that are chosen more carefully, not because anyone is watching, but because the person doing the choosing has sat with something long enough to understand what it cost them not to. The compass worked exactly as it should have. He and Mara used it for the first time 3 weeks after he bought it, on a trail northwest of Kananaskis, in the first snow of the season. Light snow, the kind that coats the spruce branches without breaking them, the kind that turns the silence of a mountain forest into something that can almost be held. Mara had the compass, and Raymond was walking a step behind, correcting her bearing adjustments with small suggestions, and mostly watching. She was serious about it. She moved the way serious people move when they are learning something that matters, with attention and without embarrassment about the learning itself. At the top of the ridge, she turned and looked at the mountains to the west, and she asked him the question he had been expecting since they parked the truck, the one she always saved until the scenery was exactly right. Did Mom know how to use a compass? She didn't need to, Raymond said. She always knew where she was. Mara thought about this. She looked at the compass in her hand, then at the mountains. I think I'm going to need to practice. Everyone does. Even you. Especially me. She handed the compass back to him. He turned it once, checked their bearing, and handed it back. Hold it level, he said. Let it settle. She did. The needle moved, steadied, found its direction. Mara watched it the way she watched things she was learning to trust, with patience, with no particular hurry, with the quiet faith of someone who has been taught, without being told in so many words, that the world will tell you what you need to know if you are willing to wait for the needle to stop. They stood on the ridge for a while. The snow fell in small, unhurried increments. The mountains did not move. Raymond did not look at his phone. He was not thinking about the email, or the store, or the woman in the charcoal coat who had stood still in a room and discovered, in the space of 4 minutes, the specific gravity of a misjudgment made in public. He was thinking about the angle of the light through the spruce trees, and whether the snow would hold by afternoon, and Mara's bearing corrections, which were improving. He was thinking about dinner, and what they would make, and whether she would let him play the record he wanted, or whether she would negotiate the evening towards something with a faster tempo. He was thinking about Walter the fox, who had been left in the truck because Mara had decided, after consultation, that Walter was not a hiking fox. He was thinking about almost nothing, in the way you can think about almost nothing when the day is exactly what it is, and what it is happens to be enough. The world does not announce the things it gives back to you. It does not hold a ceremony. It places a compass in your hands on a mountain ridge in the first snow of the year, with your daughter standing beside you adjusting her bearing, and it does not say anything at all. You either notice or you don't. You either let it mean something, or you keep moving through it looking for something else. Raymond noticed. He always had.